there is some what's it called? The providence of this. No, what's the? Oh my God, this is not starting off well for me. The provenance is that the historical thing where you know where it comes from? The provenance of this.
Yes, provenance.
Provenance. Okay, so yes, not providence. That is like, oh, divine providence. So the provenance of this video is that, of course, I spend all day. It seems sometimes going back and forth with Zoe about the latest PragerU shenanigans and announcements, and that is the provenance of this of this video. There should be. Did you guys ever watch Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse? Pee Wee's Playhouse.
Of course.
Okay, you know how they had the secret word. When you say the secret word, we all scream. So yeah, every time that I say provenance. Set this up before we click play. What in the world is going on here?
Yeah, so I actually have not watched it all the way through. I saw it and immediately sent it to you because I figured, you're both history teachers. This is your whole thing. It's very similar to the video that Marissa Streit did calling out the Young Turks analysis of their kids' content, where she was like, they say that we're lying, but we're not. And so they have brought on their, PragerU Kids, like, fact checker. I'm sure we'll get into him and his background.
It's a weird role.
And allegedly, he is the one who makes sure that all of their PragerU Kids stuff is factual and evidence-based and whatever.
Chris, do you want to pull up his bio real quick? This really seems like a behind-the-scenes role at PragerU Kids. Seems like a weird career trajectory for the kind of thing that he has been in. Like, as a commentator on C-SPAN, in a History Channel documentary on President Franklin Roosevelt. He's been an editorial writer for a lot of right-wing stuff, master's degree in public administration, and a bachelor's degree in history and political science. A pretty just like normal dude from a pretty normal, conservative background, not like an apparatchik or someone who's just like driven into right-wing extremism,
Okay, one second. Let me.
And I will say, Jill's her voice in this video is like 14 times louder than Richard's.
Yes. Okay, we're live. Hi, everybody. Jill Simonian here from PragerU Kids. We are live on Facebook and YouTube, and I'm super excited, and I wish that we had a drum roll because the person you see sitting next to me, the gentleman, is named Richard Lim, and
That's a good move right there.
That's me. Yes.
He's super modest, super smart, and you also happen to be one of my favorite people here at work, and I'm not just saying that because we're live. I really do mean that.
I'm the most modest person in this company, actually. So there you go.
What a nice guy.
I'm very excited. Hello to all the parents. Hello to the teachers who are joining us. Anyone on Facebook and YouTube.
Her vibes are way off in this video. Her vibes are off the hook. Compared to him, like, again, being like the normal dude in the picture here. She's just had one too many shots of espresso, I think.
I feel like the lighting is weird, right? Like it feels, or like the color scheme is wrong. Like it's too dark.
Yeah, there's something like very David Lynchian about it.
Yes.
Almost like a news commentator on like Fox News or something, as opposed to a children's curriculum media head. She doesn't really give me the vibe of wholesome, happy arts and crafts, fun mom.
At what state you're in. Tell me if you're a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, whatever. We love to hear from you here at PragerU Kids. If you have not subscribed for free to PragerUKids.com, go for it now because we keep you equipped to educate your children with knowledge and cultural literacy as opposed to lies. And what Richard is here to talk about.
Hold on. She just kind of threw that in there with knowledge and cultural literacy as opposed to lies. Now, Richard, what? So, but again, we harped on this. We banged this gong in the last video about cultural literacy.
And that cultural literacy bit has come up in like every state that's been adopting the PragerU curriculum. Like the Oklahoma superintendent talked about cultural literacy, knowledge-based curriculum. They're hitting the buzzwords.
Yeah.
Yeah, back to basics. Do you want to put it at like 1.25, Chris? Just to...
Sure.
What, all the Zoomers? in the audience.
It's no skibbity toilet, I'll tell you.
That's Gen Alpha.
Ah, shoot.
Could you imagine this as Skibbity Toilet?
Are lies.
We hate lies. Lies are horrible. So that's why we exist. To combat lies.
We combat lies here at PragerU Kids, and we take it very seriously. Richard, what's your official title? I know that I've been here for about, almost 3 years, and I think that you started a few months after me. What's your title?
So it's senior editor and researcher. My self-proclaimed title is resident historian.
It is.
But that's what people say. That's what people call me.
Earlier, she made a whole big deal about how humble he is. And he's like, oh yes, my self-described title is resident historian. That's not the title that a humble person gives themselves. Let me just say that.
Also interesting, the verbiage they use to say combating lies is like one of their primary purposes. Whereas if you consider organizations that maybe offer more perspectives on history, like Zen Ed Project or something, even they don't say, like, what you're reading is all lies. They say, we're offering a nuanced, multiple perspective take on what's going on.
Yeah, it's almost like, because like history is complicated and there's maybe not perfectly black and white objective answers to things.
It is interesting to note that if he's a resident historian, he has the same credential that I do. I have a BA in history. Chris, is your BA in history as well?
Yep.
Which one of us will have to fight for the title of resident historian at the Human Restoration Project? But right, like having a BA in history and kind of just having an interest in it does not make you like a historian.
Okay, which means he is the prominent fact checker here. We have a lot of fact checkers. Mm-hmm. Our PragerU Kids content, videos, books, magazines, it's all written and created by credentialed teachers, people with masters in education, historians like Richard. Yes, I am one of the personalities and I write.
Now, in this moment is when the credentials matter, right? They will lambast mainstream education and talk about the corrupting impacts of higher ed. And you don't want to send your kids off to college because they'll, do all this to indoctrinate your kids. And then on the other side, they'll say, oh, we know that our educational materials are sound and good because we've had them created by credentialed teachers who have a master's degree in education and all of these other things to lend them the authority that of a mainstream kind of audience. But that's not what they are going for. This whole time they've been going for alternative credentialing and yada, yada, yada.
But I get my facts from Richard. So you are credible, and we're going to dispel some facts here because, as we all know,
Dispel lies.
We're going to dispel lies.
We're going to uphold facts.
We're going to
uphold them. Yes.
Freudian
that's
slip.
what happens when you're live. We are going to uphold facts, dispel lies, because as you know, here at PragerU, particularly in the last several months, PragerU Kids has been attacked by many left-leaning and mainstream media outlets saying that we are putting out revisionist history, which is it starts out being funny when you say that, but after you get bombarded with so many articles accusing you of things you're not doing, it gets really, I'm really actually offended by this, and I hate saying that I'm offended by these.
Wait, so they don't like it when people make up lies about them and say mean things about them that they don't consider to be true? Like, for instance, like calling LGBTQ people groomers? Wow, can't imagine how that feels.
They get offended when people say things that are
They want to be in a
Zoe.
safe space so they can be protected from the mean things that people are saying about them.
We take things very seriously. And for those of you who are watching right now, I'm pulling up on my screen one of the more recent articles that has really raked us all over the coals wrongfully. This is from Media Matters for America. And as you can see on the title here, research file, we watched every PragerU Kids video. Here are the lowlights. And these authors here that I'm hovering over have gone through and allegedly watched every single PragerU Kids video for the sole purpose of accusing us that we are putting out revisionist history. Here's the research file. I've pulled it up on my screen. Richard and I, all of us on the PragerU Kids team, we've already looked through all of this. If you scroll down, I'm just going to take you through it in case you're new to this conversation. They talk about videos. Here's the video of Booker T. Washington. They also talk about our Around the World series, how we tackle topics, geopolitical topics like climate change and socialism and religious freedom. Exactly. Thank you. I'm going to scroll down now to our Leo and Layla series. This is one of the series, Richard, I don't write this particular series. We have a credentialed teacher, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Who I hope I can say this. She used to be a part of Los Angeles Unified School District, but we have a credentialed teacher, incredible, excellent, who writes the Leo and Layla series. And
I don't know that being a credentialed teacher automatically makes you fit to have like the knowledge to write these things. But more importantly, it definitely does not give you the background knowledge you need to be a good and entertaining writer. Like, I have a friend, Hoots, who she has a video about the like artistic issues with PragerU Kids, because she's like an actress and like she does analysis of media and stuff. She essentially like lambasts PragerU Kids for just being devoid of any artistic value, and like it's just some characters in a void talking to each other, and like there's nothing interesting going on. So like, honestly, not surprised that the person who is writing these episodes does not have a background in, say, media production or creative writing.
Also odd that a multi-million-dollar company only has one writer for the entire series. Like, they're not bringing in experts for that specific content. Like, if you consider pretty much any large like media company that's producing content on history or biology or whatever it might be, different people write each episode based off their expertise. It's not just some random teacher. Like, that's very odd.
Well, Chris, you wouldn't want to lose the voice of Leo and Layla, right? By diluting it amongst a team. The creative project exists in the mind of this individual. That's where the power comes from. I would not have guessed the place to put a credentialed teacher is in the writer's room of the show. Right? That's not like a crossover skill that works one-to-one to create Prager's edutainment.
Well, it's also confusing because Jill Simonian writes the other series. So like, are those series not as valid because they're not written by a teacher?
I feel like there's an interesting connection between like the content and quality of their lesson plans and the fact that these videos are written by a teacher. It's like they're conflating, like we saw it in the opposite direction where they're saying like, oh, for this lesson, you can just show the kids a video. So it's like teaching is a video in that direction, but also here where it's like, oh, if you're a teacher, you can automatically write a video. And so it's just an interesting like idea of what pedagogy is.
Well, that makes sense because typically folks that are in this knowledge-based curriculum field think that the proper form of education is you give a lecture. It's knowledge-based, quote unquote. You repeat what was in the lecture, you answer some questions, and you call it a day because you learned something. So if a credentialed teacher writes an engaging video and then kids just respond to it, that's doing the same as I think a teacher is supposed to do.
Leo and Layla is a brother and sister cartoon duo that travel through time to meet different historical figures. Media Matters here, if you've read this article, has gone through many episodes. They don't like The Adventure with Officer Tatum because it talks about how police protect and serve. Ooh, you know.
Forbid.
Right. Yes. Here they're lambasting our episode about Booker T. Washington. You've seen Governor Newsom tweet about how much he hates our Christopher Columbus episode. You know, Richard, you know about this. I want to take us now to Adventures with Adam Smith. I want to take us now to the episode that discusses Frederick Douglass. This has gotten a lot of heat. Why?
Well, first of all, it deals with a difficult subject in American history. Frederick Douglass was a slave, and he knew firsthand the horrors of slavery. But he had a very fascinating view about slavery and about that whole situation, about the Civil War, that really counters the left's narrative. The left wants people to believe that America was founded on slavery, that was the reason why America was founded. And there were people that Frederick Douglass knew in his time that believed that, like William Lloyd Garrison. So for the left, Garrison is a hero. But Douglass, and remember, Douglass was a slave. He knew how horrific slavery was. But he studied the founding era. And unlike Douglass, he came to the conclusion that slavery was not the basis of the American experiment.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there.
Yes,
I'm going to stop you right there. Because I know you got good stuff. I know you got good stuff.
Sure.
But I want to go through this episode. Like, I'm going to, let's watch. You know, when someone says, hey, this episode was talking about this, it's bad for this reason, you know, Media Matters here has this article about how they disagree with many different points in Leo and Layla. So why not go to the original source?
Let's do it.
Let's watch it. And then I'm going to stop, and then I want you to lend your expertise. Sure. This is what we do in our PragerU Kids office. This is what, when we say transparency in education, this is what we do. Every single thing that we have at PragerU Kids is on our website for parents, teachers, critics, fans. You can watch all of it in its entirety. There aren't any secrets. You can see, and you can then research for yourself. And, you know, I brought Richard here to be our researcher. So
why do they keep making this argument when that's exactly what people are doing?
Yeah, it's like, how dare you look at our stuff and critique it? But it's all there. It's all transparent, so you can look at it and critique it. Like, okay, do you like that? Like, do you want people to do that or not?
If there is transparency, then it is above reproach. You cannot even criticize it because we put everything out there. But I think what we'll see is that this really isn't. And I've curated some links. Maybe Chris hasn't put up here, but let's let them start to watch it, because really, even in even the clips that they show are really, they're taken out of context, like 3 levels removed.
Keep in mind that in practically every classroom across the entire United States, any parent can access exactly what their kids are doing in the classroom. There's this thing called an LMS, like Google Classroom, where you can access everything that's posted for your kids. And 9 times out of 10, those are resources that you can find online or in a Google document that you could also check and see what's being said to your kids. So there's nothing special about being able to access these educational resources online.
She makes me so anxious.
Her personality type is terrifying to me.
.com. It's free. You can go to the website and look for it. This episode right here, Leo and Layla meet Frederick Douglass. The whole episode is about 7.5 minutes. I'm only going to watch little clips because I want Richard to react to some of the issues that Media Matters has had with this. And one of the issues, I do want to go back here. Let me go back and see one of the issues. One of the issues that Media Matters had is Douglass tells Leo and Layla that even though the Founding Fathers knew slavery was wrong, allowing slavery was a compromise made to unite the country. Here's what Media Matters said. Our Founding Fathers knew that slavery was evil and wrong, and they knew it would do terrible harm to the nation. They wanted it to end, but their first priority was getting the 13 colonies to unite as one country, Douglass says. The Founding Fathers made a compromise to achieve something great. So that's what we're saying in our video, but Media Matters...
Just to clarify,
yes.
That's what we have Douglass saying in the video.
That's what we have Douglass saying. So let's go ahead and look at the clip right now. Here we go. Listen up.
Are you a slave, Mr. Douglass?
I was, but not anymore. I was born a slave, and I was taken from my family at the age of 6.
That's just so terrible. How did you deal with that?
It was very hard, and I was often sad. But I taught myself to read and write, and like I always say, knowledge is the pathway from slavery to freedom. As a boy, I was regularly beaten. But when I was 21, I had had enough and escaped to the North, where slavery is against the law, and have never looked back. Today, I am a free American, fighting for all to be free.
How can there be slavery in America when the Founding Fathers said that all men are created equal?
Yeah, and I've heard that some of those Founding Fathers owned slaves. What about that?
Children, our Founding Fathers knew that slavery was evil and wrong, and they knew that it would do terrible harm to the nation. They wanted it to end, but their first priority was getting all 13 colonies to unite as one country. The southern colonies were dependent on slave labor, and they wouldn't have joined a union that had banned it.
Are you okay with that?
I'm certainly not okay with slavery. But the Founding Fathers made a compromise to achieve something great, the making of the United States.
Oh, her hovering over the little pause button the whole time was also making me so anxious. It was so distracting.
I don't know if I've ever actually seen the video element of this as much as just read about it. But Zoe, as you were saying about that other video you were referencing, just imagine that you're traveling back in time and you meet Frederick Douglass in front of like in Washington, D.C. And your first question is something like, is it true that you used to be a slave? Yes, it is true. I used to be a slave. Like, that's such a weird, a very strange conversation, very odd opener.
Would this be a good time to bring in the context of the video in which they chose to go back in time to see Frederick Douglass? Like, what question and topic launched the discussion? What is the purpose of this video, right? Why would Leo and Layla go back in time to have this conversation? And why why would Prager choose Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison as the people to represent this issue?
That's right, Bob. Despite some violence and destruction by some of our angrier activists, we're seeing mostly peaceful protests.
I love his face.
Christ.
Protesters are demanding that the police be abolished.
Well, Clint, these local activists want to abolish the police. They're claiming systematic oppression and want the U.S. system torn down.
What is going on? Things are so weird right now.
I know. Mrs. Calder gave us an assignment today about being activists for justice.
Isn't Mrs. Calder your math teacher?
Yeah, we learn math, but we spend a lot of time learning about the stuff they talk about in the news.
That's weird. Isn't math class supposed to be for math?
Why is everyone so angry? Are they burning a car? What does abolish even mean?
That's enough. Let's get to the bottom of this.
The app?
You got it. Abolitionist? Let's check this out.
Thanks, I hate it.
So they're watching on the news racial justice protests. The word abolition, I guess it comes up in maybe like abolish the police or something. And they type that into their value because they search for value, abolitionist, and whoop, it popped them into time with Frederick Douglass.
I cannot imagine a teacher showing this to their classroom. I just can't. I just can't imagine how even students would react to this. The first thing that they're doing is, outside of implying that these protesters are violent, but the first thing that they do other than that is try to establish that their teacher is the enemy or doing something wrong. That'd be a very odd thing to show in a classroom, that the first thing they're saying is your teacher's a liar or they're an activist or a socialist or whatever they're trying to imply.
I think it's an interesting rhetorical choice that they make to have Layla, who is just like an older sister. She's not, like an expert on anything. And her issue with it is that it's weird. It's weird that your math teacher is talking about this. Isn't that weird?
It's supposed to explore, reform versus abolition, right? So like gradual change over time, institutionalist kind of thinking versus radical thinking. So they portray William Lloyd Garrison as this radical who wants to burn it all down. And Frederick Douglass is like this rational moderate who recognizes the glory of the Constitution, wants to work within the system to change it. And it's apologia for the gradualism of the abolition of slavery then to answer the question like, well, why didn't the founders get rid of slavery when they had a chance in the Constitution, right? Or with the founding of the country, why didn't they get rid of it?
Do they dive right into the question here?
Hi, are you an abolitionist?
I am. My name is Frederick Douglass. Welcome to 1852.
Thanks. I recognize you from a picture in my U.S. history textbook. You have really cool hair. I'm Layla. That's my brother, Leo.
We're trying to learn about activism and abolishing things. Can you help us?
We're starting with microaggressions? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
To brag.
All right, go ahead.
But I'm the perfect guy for you to talk to. I'm the most famous activist in America, and I'm currently working on getting something abolished.
Abolish means to end, right? What are you wanting to get rid of?
I want slavery to end. At this time that you have come to visit, for half of the United States, it is okay for some people to own other people.
The plot is so bizarre. So Frederick Douglass is just like standing there, and then two time travelers show up and they just are like, hey, who are you? And then he just knows.
He's got to give him a history lesson.
Also, why is West Virginia purple? Literally, their whole thing was we don't want to be part of Virginia because they have slavery.
There's not a key to this map either,
that's
so
true.
I don't really know.
Maybe
what does it really?
know
What
what
does
that
even
mean.
mean, really?
Yeah.
Make them work for many hours for no pay, and force them to do anything, anytime.
That's so unfair and horrible.
You're right. The sad fact is slavery has existed everywhere in the world for thousands of years. But it's especially disappointing here because America was founded on the idea of freedom. Yet so many black people
And chattel slavery, very different.
are not free.
Are you a slave, Mr. Douglass?
I was, but not anymore. I was born a slave.
All right. So then they're diving in now to this segment. All right. So back to the PragerU analysis of the video that we were just watching the context to. We're going in layers here. This is layer 3 at this moment.
This is Inception. We need to go deeper.
Stop right there. So you can see, obviously, we addressed that Frederick Douglass was a slave. It's not like we're pretending, oh, this never existed. So we addressed.
Slavery was horrific. Sorry. I mean, we say it right there.
We say it right there. I get so worked up about this.
Yeah. Well, it's a cheap shot. They portray you as whitewashing history, but they don't actually acknowledge what we actually say.
Yeah. So that when they talk when Frederick Douglass here says the 13 colonies had to unite. Can you shed some light on that? Where did we get this from? Did we make this up and put it in the video? Fill me in.
Yeah, sure. So there is a speech that Douglass gave in 1860. It's called, the title of it was The Constitution of the United States, Pro-Slavery or Anti-Slavery. And in that speech, Douglass makes the argument for why the Union is necessary. And as a result of that, the fact that it was necessary, then the compromise that allowed it to happen, you could make the argument that that's essentially the underlying principle of what he's saying. So I'll read exactly what Douglass said. This isn't what we say Douglass said. This is an actual quote. You could look it up. 1860 speech, the Constitution of the United States, pro-slavery or anti-slavery. He said, quote, "My argument against the dissolution of the American Union is this." So this is when the South was threatening to secede. And this is saying why he believes the Union should stay together. "It would place the slave system more exclusively under the control of slave-holding states and withdraw it from the power of the northern states, which is opposed to slavery." So he's saying that if the South splits up, slavery is going to continue in the South. But if the Union holds together, the anti-slavery forces in the North can influence the South and eventually push for the end of slavery. And he said, "I am therefore for drafting the bond of the Union more closely and bringing the slave states more completely under the power of the free states." So there Douglass is arguing that, hey, slavery is horrible, but the way you achieve it ultimately disappearing is that you have a union of both free and slave states. So the Union was one of the means that allowed that to happen, which is why he supported President Abraham Lincoln's effort, and he supported Ulysses Grant. I mean, he called Abraham Lincoln, quote, emphatically the black man's president. And he called Ulysses Grant a protector to his people. He's talking about his fellow African Americans. Right. So there is Douglass essentially saying that the compromise that led the Union together, that compromise is necessary for slavery to go extinct inevitably.
Right.
I want to just put a pin in how he is talking about, hey, if the Union stays together, then inevitably slavery will go away. Right? If the pro and anti-slavery states stay together, then it'll bring the anti-slavery states more under the influence, or the pro-slavery states more under the influence of the anti-slavery states, and then it'll vanish, with really no conversation about how this was supposed to proceed. And if this was a speech that Douglass was giving in 1860, here right on the cusp of the Civil War, how did slavery ultimately end in the United States 100 years after the founding?
The John Brown raid is pretty much one of the cornerstone things that occurred before the Civil War. Like
it was the dry run.
Not revisionist history. This is like basic facts that you learn.
And get this, John Brown asked Frederick Douglass, "Hey, you want to go raid Harper's Ferry with me?" So Douglass had an opportunity to be involved in that and passed on it, I think, for whatever reason, but him and John Brown, one of the links that we'll look at here is a speech that he gives about John Brown and his activism, and it's unequivocal in portraying the moral virtue of John Brown and the stuff that he did.
Right, and it's worth noting here, I just pulled this up from like the Gilder Lehrman Institute stuff, just like on why he decided not to go on that thing. And basically, Douglass thinks that he's just going into a steel trap where he won't get out alive. So he just assumes it to be a suicide mission, which it was a suicide mission in a sense. It was important to the abolition of slavery, but I mean, it led to all of them dying or close to it? I mean, everybody was put to death.
Well, yeah. So if they didn't die in the raid, they were,
Yeah.
The funnel that the video has to go through to present the simplistic narrative necessarily cuts out the historical context, the nuance, and provides, again, a whitewashed, flattened picture of a truly radical figure like Frederick Douglass. It's the same level of upset that I get when you hear reactionaries talk about Martin Luther King Jr., right, who for all intents and purposes was a socialist, right, was a radical religious figure, not in like a conventional evangelical sense today, but right, was really fueled by this mission. But they want to flatten and whitewash him to just say, oh, he just stood for this, that, or the other thing, when really, no, these were radical people in favor of radical action who believed necessary change was happening far too slowly.
For clarity's sake, I'm going to actually speed this up to 1.5 speed.
And this is the type, just to, again, raise the veil over what everything we do here on a day-to-day basis. This is the type of research that we do for every single PragerU Kids video. That is the original speech. It's literally the quote from the speech that came from Frederick Douglass's mind and mouth. And that is the material we use. Okay, I want to skip forward in this video a little bit to another, let me see, another timestamp here at... Let me see, I'm looking for 4:18. We're jumping around. Watch the whole episode. I encourage you to do that. Okay, let's watch this clip. Are we ready? Technical guru Cam to watch the... Yes, he's giving me a thumbs up. Okay, we're going to watch this next clip.
Deep in the course of ages.
Huh?
What I mean is, sometimes things are more complicated than they might seem.
As you were saying.
And complicated problems take time to solve.
When I have a complicated math problem, if I rush to solve it, I make mistakes.
Video a little bit to another, let me see, another timestamp here at... Let me see, I'm looking for 4:18. We're jumping around. Watch the whole episode. I encourage you to do that. Okay, let's watch this clip. Are we ready? Technical guru Cam to watch the... Yes, he's giving me a thumbs up. Okay, we're going to watch this next clip.
Deep in the course of ages.
Huh?
What I mean is, sometimes things are more complicated than they might seem.
As you were saying.
And complicated problems take time to solve.
When I have a complicated math problem, if I rush to solve it, I make mistakes.
Leo, ending slavery is such a bigger deal than
I think
your
it's
math
coming out.
problems.
Okay.
It certainly is, Layla. Along with independence and democracy, it's probably America's biggest deal. There was no real movement anywhere in the world to abolish slavery before the American founding. Slavery was part of life all over the world. It was America that began the conversation to end it. But Leo is correct that big problems need to be approached very carefully. Have you kids heard of William Lloyd Garrison?
No.
Oh, did I miss the quote?
I think it's just
I missed a quote. It's a little far. Hold on.
What's taking the southern states?
Jeez. As you were saying, Nick, like this is making me so stressed out that she is... I mean, I know we're playing it at 1.5 times speed, but even then, the amount of times that she's checking to make sure that she can stop this thing at the right moment is... It's like raising my blood pressure.
Do what's right.
Great streams are not easily turned from channels worn deep in the course of ages.
Huh?
What I mean is...
That was it. Okay, so I messed up the technical portion of this program. I wanted to get to that quote, great change, when he discusses great change. Again, another quote from one of his speeches, because Leo and Layla are saying, well, what took so long? Why didn't they end slavery right away? That was terrible.
Okay, so one of the things that PragerU gets very upset about is when people take clips of their shows out of context. That's like their whole issue. Like in this stream, they talk about that a lot. Marissa Streit, in her discussion of the Young Turks analysis and reaction, she was like, oh, well, they're taking everything out of context. If you watch the whole episode, whatever. And yet, that's exactly what they're doing with every single historical figure. And the quotes from these historical figures.
It's mind-blowing because I think a typical critique by historians of a traditional history school curriculum is that textbooks have a tendency to either intentionally or unintentionally whitewash history because it distills complex, nuanced topics down to basic fact-based information. And history is very much a gray area, and it's debated on top of that. So like we don't know exactly what happened, so people argue about different perspectives, etc. But PragerU is taking that one step further by distilling the distillation of textbooks because they think textbooks are mainstream. So they're offering an even more biased perspective on what was already biased.
Essentially, right, they're saying, we quoted Frederick Douglass, so we can't be lying. And that really misunderstands, right, Chris, you and I as history teachers, if a kid uses a quote and it's out of context or it's used in the wrong way, we would still say like, well, that's not really representing what they said. And if you could go to the speech of Frederick Douglass, which we have pulled up, the link from Black Past is the one that Jill Simonian uses. And if you just do a Control F for Course of Ages or something, because that's the quote that they're pulling through here, right? So they literally just pull this one section out of it just to say like, oh, in the course of ages. So in the context here, Frederick Douglass is saying great streams are not easily turned from channels worn deep of the course of ages. They may sometimes rise quietly, et cetera. So it's this metaphor for how do you, change course. And this is from, as they'll mention later in the video, his speech from 1852, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. It's a reflection on how here they were on the date of independence, Independence Day, and you have millions of Americans still at this time who are under the yoke of this barbarity of slavery, and how absolutely inexcusable it is. They are taking this as a quote to say, oh, change takes a long time, right? To just kind of neuter him of his power when go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, travel through South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. So,
love it.
Again, there is power even in that own speech. So they're gonna claim to be representing Douglass by saying, "Hey, we're taking this quote from the Great Course of Ages, from this what was the 4th of July to a slave speech, and removing it from the actual righteous anger and emotion that Frederick Douglass displays at the delay that is before us." He says, yes, things take time, but recognize the longer we wait, the longer that suffering builds. Yeah, let's see here. In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, the fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation. I doubt if there is another nation on the globe having the brass and the baseness to put such a law on the statute book. If any man in this assembly thinks differently from me in this matter, it feels able to disprove my statements, I will gladly confront him at any suitable time and place he may select.
And I don't know. The way that PragerU and especially Leo and Layla handles issues is like not only inaccurate and they're, cherry picking quotes and whatever, but like this could be so much more fun if you focused on lines like that one, where Frederick Douglass is literally like, yeah, you think you can debate me on this? Fight me. You won't.
And think about whose side. They started off the Leo and Layla clip with them watching this unrest in the streets, right? Which, of course, Martin Luther King would say, if riots are the language of the unheard, then what is it that America has failed to hear? That's in the tradition of a Frederick Douglass. So they're saying here that Douglass would side against these radical protesters who are going to violence in the street and in favor of the institutionalists that have allowed slavery to linger so long because, well, radical change is real hard and it takes time. Like, absolutely not. So they're not lying. They're not misquoting him, but they're putting it in the inappropriate context. And
we shouldn't pull punches there. If you use quotes from a figure or a person, if you use quotes from anyone and you're using them out of context to prove a point that they wouldn't have made, that is an inaccuracy. It's a lie.
Yeah, right? That is academic dishonesty, and it's bad.
Especially when you're choosing a fundamental figure of the abolitionist movement to say that he was somehow in favor of continuing the practice of slavery. And at the end of the day, it's a form of indoctrination, right? Because even people who went through a fairly mundane history class know this. Like, I think most people that went through typical K-12 history know who Frederick Douglass is on a general basis of his views on slavery. But if you went through a course where your teacher is showing you a video of kids being confused about protesters burning cars, who then go back and talk to Frederick Douglass and he says that, it is what it is, we figure it out in the future, you're raising a generation of people who just don't fundamentally understand the basis of the United States and where we are today. It's very
can I
problematic.
Even add,
is not a strong enough word.
Put a conspiracy hat on just to say, maybe for some kids, if this is their first exposure to Douglass, could this be like an inoculation against his radicalism? To just say then when they approach Douglass in an academic context later, they're going to perceive him in the wrong way. And that could, that will have to be deprogrammed or something by later education.
I mean, that already happens, as you were saying earlier with MLK Jr. I think the majority of the populace doesn't know who MLK Jr. actually was. In the same way they don't know who Helen Keller was. They think that she's just a deaf and mute person as opposed to a radical socialist.
Leo and Layla are literally asking him questions. Why didn't the founding fathers end slavery right away if they knew it was wrong? And he responds with,
yeah. So in his famous speech, this was actually in 1852. It's probably his most famous speech. It's what to the slave is the 4th of July. You could look it up. What to the slave is the 4th of July. He gave it in 1852, and he says there is consolation in the thought that America is young. And here's the quote we used: "Great streams are not easily turned from channels worn deep in the course of ages." So there, what he's actually saying in that line is that America, in a sense, is fortunate because the fact that it's so young, you can change things. And in other countries, I mean, America was the youngest country on earth at the time, or one of the youngest countries. And countries have been around. China had been around for centuries. Egypt, all these other empires, right? And it would have been a lot harder, he argued, to change it there. So that's really the context of the quote that we're using. But the thing I want to point out is that people like Garrison wanted immediate change, whatever the consequences, even if it destroyed the country. And Frederick Douglass was very much against that. He worked within the system that the founding fathers had created. And again, that's why I keep pointing out the fact that he was a strong supporter. He didn't always agree with everything Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses Grant did, but when it came to looking back at what they accomplished, he believed that they had the right approach. And Douglass was willing to work with them to get great change.
That's right.
Which is antithetical to that entire speech. That is not at all that's a complete mischaracterization. I mean, you could pull out points of that and say, yeah, Frederick Douglass believed in working within a system to make change, but it doesn't mean that he was against the idea of more radical measures to break those changes.
And let's not forget, too, that what they're picking from there in that instance comes from the 4th paragraph. Chris, go back to just how long the speech actually is. It's like if you use something from the introduction of a speech, just say, oh, that's all he said right there, neglecting the rest of the context. Go to the very last couple of paragraphs, right here on the bottom where it begins the repetition of Godspeed, Godspeed, Godspeed. Like, let's see just how well this supports the thesis here. He says, Godspeed the year of Jubilee, the wide world over, when their galling chains set free. The oppressed shall vilely bend the knee and wear the yoke of tyranny like brutes no more. That year will come and freedom's reign to man his plundered fights again restore. Godspeed the day when human blood shall cease to flow and every clime be understood. The claims of human brotherhood and each return for evil good, not blow for blow. That day will come, all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe. Godspeed the hour, the glorious hour, when none on earth shall exercise a lordly power.
William Lloyd Garrison, this is he was one of the, he was one of the founders of the American Slave Society, and he wrote this. He's just quoting William Lloyd Garrison.
Yes, that's what I was getting at. I thought that was the case. So. Yeah. So again, they're going to drive a wedge between them and between Douglass and Garrison. Garrison is who Douglass quotes in the speech that they're using in this thing. So again, they're driving wedges where none need to be.
What's extra nefarious about this is that Richard knows that. If Richard is truly an historian he has a bachelor's degree in history, so he's an historian, and he's reviewing these materials closely. If you're going to be fact-checking quotes from that, you probably should know those figures front and back, and not just go on a live stream and pretend like you know.
And Richard has his what I call a cheat sheet there. Yes. We don't believe in cheating at PragerU Kids, but sometimes you got to print out documents. Yeah. Richard has his document there, but I am also pulling up on my computer, if you're watching, and this is from blackpass.org.
Which is the website that we have open.
Know anything about this website. We just wanted to find the original text of Frederick Douglass's speeches, and I am pulling up the exact text of his speech right now. And if you scroll down, this is What to the Slave is the 4th of July from 1852. And these quotes that we include in our Leo and Layla episode that has been lambasted, these quotes from Frederick Douglass's actual speech are in our episode. And you can read this entire speech and you can find these quotes about great change. And you can find these quotes about how he identifies, the Constitution as a glorious liberty document. Richard, I want to watch that clip right now. Will you watch it with me?
Yes.
All right, let me find it because this has raised a lot. This has been very contentious, how we included that Frederick Douglass cited the Constitution as a great liberty document. Let's take a listen to this.
Glorious
liberty document.
They're going to get you on that.
I'm going to watch out. I'm going to look out for the comments. Yes. Leave a comment if you have been following how much our PragerU Kids content has been harassed and falsely accused. Leave a comment if you followed, or leave me a question, because I'm going to check the comments in a little bit. Thank you, by the way, for this great history lesson. Again, this is what we do behind the scenes here at PragerU Kids. I want to watch this. Yes, we're nerds, but that's what it takes.
Proud nerds. Yes.
Proud nerds.
Yes.
And admittedly, before I started working here, I did not know half of the American history and how our system of government worked. I didn't know half of what I should have known as a grown woman. Because they don't teach it. And that's what we're trying to teach now. Okay, let's watch this quote from Frederick Douglass, Leo and Layla episode on PragerUKids.com. Let's take a look at the last thing. Are we ready, Cam?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Play.
Know the time.
Yeah, we've got that type in our time.
It's coming up.
So, you're trying to work for change inside of the American system.
Precisely, Layla. Our system is wonderful, and the Constitution is a glorious liberty document. We just need
he said
Americans to be true to it.
And people like Garrison don't just want slavery abolished, but the whole American system.
You are correct.
Are you triggered?
I'm triggered. Okay.
Quote, they just pulled 3 words, glorious liberty document. So it's just like, it you know those blurbs for movies that are really bad? And but they pull the thing just to be like, it's a movie. And that's literally what this is like, right? Like, oh, Frederick Douglass said glorious liberty document. So if we quote him saying that, that's what's historically accurate. But it's like
without any of the
pulling...
context that he's saying that if you were to interpret it as it ought to be interpreted, the Constitution is a glorious liberty document. The whole point of the speech is that it's not. Literally, the title of the speech is What to the Slave is the 4th of July, which is all about the hypocrisy of the 4th of July and living in a free space and what we declare the United States is versus what it actually is. In the exact same way the Constitution is, in theory, supposed to grant freedom to all people, but it's not. Like, that's the entire context for the speech itself that they're referencing.
I just cannot really get a handle on just how terrible the media literacy of PragerU's figureheads is, because they're just like, oh, he says these words and that's what they mean, and there's no context, there's no deeper investigation of how he's using the words or what the words mean, or there's nothing. It's the most surface level, pointless, terrible garbage.
We'll quote you on that. So they're quoting Douglass with that great, glorious, great document or whatever. They're just saying that, using that in veneration of a constitution, not to wrestle with it in the context, as Chris said, that Douglass is wrestling it with. To say, read its preamble, consider its purposes, he says. Is slavery among them? Is it at the gateway or is it at the temple? It is neither. So really he's saying, we are a nation in contradiction with our founding values, right? And we have to wrestle with how to resolve that.
Lead us through this, Richard.
Okay, well, this is one of those things that I love debunking these kind of accusations, because they actually reveal the ignorance of the person charging us with ignorance.
Yeah.
Because if you've actually read, and people take this speech out of context all the time, but we're referring to the speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. It's a great speech. As an American, I think it's one of those speeches every American should read, right? Along with Washington's farewell address.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing. Frederick Douglass says all sorts of things about how America in 1852 is being hypocritical because it allows slavery. And that's his perspective. But he doesn't say, oh, and America's been rotten all the way from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
This is a country founded on slavery. No. He says your founders created this incredible country, basically, as Lincoln said.
Where is he getting that information?
Is that what he's saying? Yeah. Is he saying that? Are we reading the same speech?
Heard an interpretation that is what Frederick Douglass is saying. He is saying that on paper you wrote this thing, but it's never been true for slaves. That's the entire point of the speech. That's not even a nuanced or deep interpretation of this. It's in every single paragraph of the entire.
Right.
It's almost like PragerU is conflating or metonymizing, I guess, the work of the founding fathers with the founding fathers themselves. So it's if he says that the Constitution, that its words theoretically are good, then he is saying that the founders who wrote those words are also good.
Right. There's a transferable property here that by criticizing the founders, you're criticizing a document, or vice versa. And that'll kind of come up later here too. And then just highlight this whole paragraph, because this is the thesis of his thing. And this comes about, 27 paragraphs after the part that they've quoted here, because he says, what to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings with all your religious parade and solemnity are, to him, mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. It's almost like he's addressing PragerU directly in that quote, right? You have to really try not to get the thesis out of just literally scrolling through and reading a full paragraph instead of just pulling out a 3-word phrase like the glorious Constitution or whatever it is that they're doing, right? Because you have to miss all of the other words adjacent to it to infer that the text means, oh, the Constitution is great.
Yeah, I did not have the opportunity to read this when I was in school. What a banger. What an incredible speech. I love this.
Right. And he's totally like subverting the purpose of this event, right? He's going to this 4th of July celebration. He's just like pulling the rug out from under him, you know? This is a subversive guy.
And it is such an incredible thing, and you need to live up to that. Now, when the lefties in Hollywood and academia quote it, they only quote the "you're being hypocrites" part.
Right.
But they don't quote the part where it's live up to your founders' dreams, right? So that quote, the Glorious Liberty document, the actual quote, which you can pull up in that speech, says, quote, this is Douglass talking, interpreted as it ought to be interpreted. The Constitution is a glorious liberty document. That's a direct quote. And he says, read its preamble, the Constitution's preamble.
We the people.
Yeah, consider its purposes. Is slavery among them? And it's a rhetorical question. So he's saying, no, it's not. It's not even mentioned in the Constitution. So again, if people accuse us of putting words into Douglass's mouth by saying the Constitution is a glorious liberty document, that's what people actually have. They only expose their own ignorance.
Yeah.
Because clearly they haven't read the speech.
Read the speech that Frederick Douglass
Yeah,
did.
we did. We read the speech when we took the time to read the speech that became the episode. So we did our homework, but clearly our critics who want people to think that, we're just putting this out in thin air, they're the ones who haven't done their homework.
We don't take this personally at all.
No.
But here's the thing. In all sincerity, we really do take what we do extremely seriously, especially because it is content for kids, kindergarten through 12th grades. As you know, PragerU Kids now has been approved for supplemental use.
You can't tell, but I am literally like physically holding myself back from like rage quitting right now. I am filled with fury. I'm a single person who makes video content on YouTube. And I take my job incredibly seriously. Nick, I showed you, and you can honestly put it up in the video if you want, this stack of books that I have for my upcoming video on the public education system. And so I do extensive research. I also have a master's degree. So, Richard and I are peers here. They say that they take it seriously. Oh, how? In what way? There is no evidence for that.
And there's an additional layer to this where then when you call them out on it, they act all aggrieved and offended. So there's this arrogant grievance that's about it too, in the way that they act oh, are you triggered? And, oh, we just get so upset when people tell us that we're lying about all of this because they can't handle just even the slightest amount of criticism. And I think it's worth pointing out too here that I don't know how long the recording is going to end up. Chris will have to determine that. But we've been talking for almost an hour and a half about the first, the first 22 minutes of a 35-minute video. So it just takes a huge, massive amount of effort to actually contextualize and combat the misinformation presented in the way that Prager does it.
It's just worth noting time and time again that these are the same people that are saying the media is being triggered by the content that they're producing and about how funny that is, while simultaneously saying that they're triggered by what the media is saying about them.
Also, this is a final catty thing. They're not nerds. Nerds give a shit about the things that they're studying and talking about.
There is no way that Jill Simonian was hanging out with nerds in high school. There is zero chance. I think everyone knows what peer group Jill
what lunch
Simonian
table Jill was at. Okay.
Jill Simonian was at the lunch table that picked on me.
to preserve the foundation of our country. And before we go, I know we're almost out of time, but before we go, I want to address something that continuously comes up when talking.
Fun fact, you could find out what Jill Simonian's passcode is to her phone from that last little clip right there. She did it live on air. Enhance this right here. Check that out.
Not very good OPSEC.
In America.
Not very good OPSEC.
This concept that church is, the separation of church and state.
Which is not in the Constitution.
Which is not in the Constitution, and there is this...
Religious freedom is in the Constitution.
Correct.
And there shall be no church established as the national church.
Right.
But everyone should be able to exercise their religious beliefs, and everyone should be free to apply those religious beliefs to their lives.
Let's not even cover that one. You could find a billion resources on that content. We could spend another hour dissecting that. We'll just skip that.
Okay, real quick.
Okay.
The only thing is, PragerU recently announced that they are partnering, their words, it is a partnership, with public schools in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma Education Superintendent Ryan Walters has literally come out and said that separation of church and state is a myth and that he wants to make them one and the same. So
I'm willing to bet that segment is going to be as well researched and interpreted and contextualized as the other one. And it's just interesting, I'm going to say, right? In order to have the perspective that they have on the separation of church and state, this originalist view that if it's not in the Constitution, then it just doesn't exist. They literally have to ignore 200 years of jurisprudence, of legal thinking,
it's the same thing they're doing with the Frederick Douglass thing. They're just ignoring 95% of information to come to a conclusion that fits their narrative.
Well, because the words separation of church and state do not appear in the Constitution, therefore that as a concept does not exist. It is a flawed way of reading legal documents.
And to their political beliefs. Martin Luther King was a pastor. Mm-hmm. He was a preacher, and he applied his...
Sorry, I wasn't expecting us to go right to MLK after we just spoke about it for a while.
Oh my God. It's like a bingo card. Do we have a bingo card for... We could do that on Discord. That would be really fun.
What is this notion that our founders did not create the United States of America with, separate of religion? Yeah. This notion that the founders were not religious is becoming more and more popular, but it is a lie.
It's a total lie. I've even heard some conservatives say...
I mean, isn't it really well known that Thomas Jefferson created his own version of the Bible to take out all of the divination stuff and what he described as magic? I feel like this is pretty well covered too.
This because they've heard this somewhere, but it's not true. Now, if you go to America today and you get 100 people and you look at just a random sample, what are you going to get in terms of religion? You're going to get a mix, right? You're going to get people, some are Christian, some are Protestant Christian, some are Catholic, some are going to be,
Muslim,
agnostic, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever, right? Well, if you go to America.
Sorry, I hate to keep pausing it, but it is really strange that they instantly went to Protestant and Catholic religions, then went to agnostic and kind of even slowed down a bit before that and finally got to Muslim and Buddhist. It's not a religion. It sadly suits this narrative that PragerU is really pushing for this white nationalist, Christo nationalist state focused on Christian values, etc.
During the founding, and you got 100 people, what are you going to get? Well, you're going to get some Baptists, you're going to get some, Puritans, you're going to get some Anglicans, and then you're going to get some people that are, not really religious. It's a mix. So it's not surprising when people say, oh, all the founders were deists. That makes no sense to me. It's did they think that there was some sort of test to become a founder? And then, if you're a deist, we accept you? No, it was a mix. Just you and I have different religious backgrounds. Right. So did the founders. They had to, it's just, but the thing is that they all grew up within a Judeo-Christian context. Now, am I saying all the founders were Christian? No, I'm not saying that. But I believe many were and some weren't. John Witherspoon, signer of the Declaration of Independence.
I love this stuff.
Yeah,
Keep going, Richard.
President of Princeton, major influence on James Madison. He was a reverend, and he said, and I'm just quoting him, in 1768, he had a sermon where he said, "Accursed be all that learning which sets itself in opposition to the cross of Christ." Now, he was a very clear Christian. I'm not saying everyone agreed with what he said, but here is just one example of a guy that was clearly somebody that spoke in Christianese, right? And he was, again, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, a major figure, president of Princeton, imagine that, and a major influence on James Madison. I've heard people say George Washington was a deist, but George Washington to his own wife in 1775 said, right when he left to become the commander of the Continental Army, he said, I go fully trusting in that providence, which has been more bountiful to me than I deserve. He's talking about God.
Right.
God has been more bountiful, has blessed him. And then at the end of the war, Washington said that the only way we can be a happy nation is to imitate the divine author of our religion, which was a title he used to refer to Jesus. So
literally nothing of what he's saying matters because we're not a nation that's based on the whims of the individual founders, but a nation of laws. And the Establishment Clause has been pretty rigorously interpreted and has pretty rich legal history in the United States of supporting the separation of church and state. So it would, in fact, be revisionism to say that, no, there is no separation of church and state, because that's actually how we've acted for, the last 200 years.
Also, are we still on Frederick Douglass? Have we moved on from Frederick Douglass? Like, are we still?
We've moved on, Chris. Where have you been?
Okay. Because it's just odd that they would invoke this idea of America is built on Judeo-Christian values when Judeo-Christian values were also one of the driving forces behind maintaining slaves in the South. Slave owners and those who made laws for slaves saw it as like a Christian duty. It's like the retrograde version of the white man's burden.
You want to know what's really funny? In Frederick Douglass's narrative, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, he writes that, in fact, the more religious your master was, the more brutally you were likely to be treated.
As far as what his actual beliefs
Frederick
were,
Douglass knew a whole lot about the religion of slave owners.
But I do know that the idea that these guys were deists is just wrong, because if a deist believes that God created the universe and just stepped away and had it run on its own like clockwork, so you don't really have to worry about, like, God doesn't intervene, right? And you clearly have Benjamin Franklin, who's often called a deist, actually, to show you how much of a nerd
he has Benjamin Franklin
socks. But Benjamin Franklin is quoted in 1787 saying, "The longer I live, the more..."
Benjamin Franklin also, like, notoriously, like, had drug-fueled orgies in France. So, like...
I'm Jill right now, right? This guy's just talking. This was what it'd be like in the office at PragerU. Richard's just going on some kind of tangent about something, and Jill's like...
There is no way these two have met and actually discussed the content in a lesson plan. I don't believe they have. I'm sure they met to address the media on the content of a lesson plan after it was already created. But there is zero chance that Richard is meeting with these people and going, yeah, like, we should really look at a critical analysis of this. And then Jill Simonian comes in and they have some nuanced conversation about history. There's no way that's happening.
I have nothing against Richard Lim. I'm sure he's a very nice guy. But again, if he's the smartest person in the room on the issues that you're addressing here, like, it's no wonder that the Prager content, he's just out of his depth. You know, he's out of his element. He needs...
I don't know. I mean, if you were to sign up and take this job, you know what you're doing. Like, you're a sellout. Like, if you're someone who honestly is taking this job and making these defenses, you are contributing to this propagandizing of the public school system. So I have no remorse.
Now, Franklin was somebody that did not subscribe to Orthodox Christianity. We know that, but he was not a deist, and he believed in Judeo-Christian values, even if he had, he may not have accepted everything that the Christian faith had to teach.
That's an understatement.
He was somebody that said, you know what, God actually governs the affairs of men. He plays a role in it. That's, by definition, anti-deist. A deist thinks that God doesn't govern the affairs of men. He just kind of left everyone alone. You know, it's like a clock. He made the clock and let the clock run itself. And so these things are so easily debunked. And I just tell you, I implore you, read
checking her Insta.
Read the speeches, read the founding documents, read the Constitution.
Don't listen to the news headlines, the main. Don't listen to that crap. Because, and the thing is, we genuinely care. You know, on our Leo and Layla videos, we look, when there's a Susan B. Anthony episode where they're in Susan B. Anthony's home. We actually did the work of looking up what Susan B. Anthony's home looked like. And just those little things. Most people aren't going to care. But, you know, for us, it's like, you know, I feel like I owe it to people like Frederick Douglass and George Washington and all these people to get it right, because they gave us this great country. And
cartoonists historically have never Googled or looked up the places at which they're drawing.
We need to get the history right.
We need to be servant leaders and have stewardship to teach the next generation what freedom is and the fundamentals that this country was founded upon, or else we're not going to have a country any longer. And that's the truth, and that's scary, but
yes. And you know, I'm confident because we have the truth on our side. It's right here.
It's
we have nothing to hide. We have the truth. We know it backs us up. So bring it on.
Bring it on. That's a challenge. Okay, I want to read you comments. Before I forget, Richard, if you haven't guessed already, Richard has a successful podcast where he talks about history and you sometimes relate it to present day, but it's focused on history. What's the name of the podcast?
It's called This American President.
This American President.
Yes.
And you can find it
anywhere, Spotify, on your podcast app, on your phone. We have a website, thisamericanpresident.com, but we also, you know, are on all the platforms.
You can see it also play out in our PragerU Kids videos. Let's read some comments. Somebody wrote, this was, I'm guessing, in response to us showing the video about Frederick Douglass and how he was talking about slavery. Daniel, thank you for your comment if you're still watching. Daniel says, Morgan Freeman says that we should stop talking about this. I understand where you're coming from, and I've seen that that quote that Morgan Freeman says, stop talking about it. In the context of our PragerU Kids videos, when we are teaching about history, we do believe that you shouldn't ignore that slavery existed. Slavery does not exist now. We are not trying to suggest that children should feel guilty in any way for slavery that happened hundreds of years ago. But in the context of our PragerU Kids videos, we do firmly believe that children should be told in an age-appropriate way, according to their age and grade level, what existed in history when, so that they can have context for assessing the world around them. Another comment that I have here, there was one problem. Jerry, thank you for this question. We get questions and comments from critics. I'm guessing this is a critic. How is this not propaganda? How are we not propaganda, Richard? Are you equipped to answer that? I have some answers, but I want to...
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I mean, propaganda is just information used for a purpose, a specific agenda. And so when you look at propaganda in the most basic term, all it is really just providing information to make a particular point, right? So if you want to look at propaganda in the most basic fundamental way, propaganda is information used to make a particular point. That literally makes every act of communication propaganda.
So, listen. In my, at this point, most recent video, I mention that indoctrination is a thing, and probably bad. And the number of people in my comments that are like, actually, indoctrination is everything. It's the same argument. I'm so irritated. This is maybe a personal problem and not...
I mean, this just builds into both sidesism, right? So now it's like, well, we have the thing that we're saying and they have the thing that they're saying. Who knows what's right? But if you read our stuff, it's not going to be the lies that they're telling you.
Yeah, words mean nothing anymore.
The whole purpose of studying history is to figure out what the truth is, which is why you look at a variety of sources. If it were the case that everything is propaganda, there would be no point in trying to learn accurate information. You would just listen to whatever source you like and go, well, I just believe whatever they tell me. It's all propaganda anyway.
It just says, your information is just as good as my misinformation. It's like, hey, it's potato. It's all the same thing kind of in the end. So really, what does it matter anyway? It's just, it's just a way of trying to avoid the conversation.
I mean, ultimately, it's all existential.
All right, Jordan Peterson.
Everything is meaningless. Nothing matters. Life is short. Watch PragerU and die.
Now, the question is that propaganda? Is that information based on what's true and not true? Obviously, propaganda has such a negative connotation because it's been used for absolutely horrible things, right? And the most famous is the way the Nazis used propaganda. But to use propaganda in that way, you're just like the Nazis, is incredibly lazy. It's incredibly lazy because it's all.
Does anyone really in like the mainstream use the word propaganda to describe positive things? I mean, I've heard like community action campaigns. Like I've had nuanced discussions in class about like what is propaganda, and I've brought in like DARE or some form of like anti-drug or and we talk about like, is that a form of positive propaganda? And there is a distinction because in the real world, no one uses the word propaganda to describe positive changes.
So to use propaganda in that way, you're just like the Nazis, is incredibly lazy. It's incredibly lazy because it's all we're doing is showing.
Well, no, it's really funny, isn't it? Because he's saying like, oh, my critics always compare me to the Nazis, and what is he doing right away? He's like using, is it Poe's law, but like in reverse. He's kind of doing a preemptive strike on Poe's law by automatically making that comparison.
Yeah,
so
more people than the Nazis used propaganda. Also, I invite him to read literally any book on the history of propaganda and the rhetoric of propaganda. Like I have on my shelf over there. Read a book.
If that's propaganda to you, I'm curious what is propaganda? History? Well, yeah, and I'm curious, like, what is history? Yeah. Because at that point...
What is history? What is learning? What is a school? What is the government? What is it? What's a dream? What's reality?
We're getting chippy. We're getting chippy here, guys. Headed into hour 2. We're getting chippy. I'm just saying.
Well, they're literally doing, I'm just asking questions.
They really are.
As a strategy of answering.
Yeah, also, like, for people who are very anti, like, postmodern thought, these are very postmodern questions of, like, what is even the meaning of
Because maybe it's just it's a very easy way to silence your opponent. To say, oh, it's propaganda. Don't listen to this guy.
Yeah, and I thank you for that response. And I read these because we do believe in freedom of speech. We don't have to agree on anything, but I appreciate your perspective. Richard, I thought this was comical, and I hope I'm interpreting this correctly. And then we're going to say goodbye. We've run a little bit over on time. But Carol says, "You are good at talking about history through a white lens." Are you? What is your ethnicity, Richard?
I'm a Filipino and mainly Filipino, a little bit of Chinese descent. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're good at talking about history through a white lens, she says.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I love studying. I mean, American history is my love, but I also love studying other countries' histories too. Yeah. And I grew up in a household that was, a Filipino household, American household of Philippine descent.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I wonder what Frederick Douglass would say about that.
I wonder. Yeah. It has been such a joy to have you here.
You heard it here. Non-white people can't possibly perpetuate white narratives about history.
Just imagine what Frederick Douglass would say about the idea of reading history through a white lens. The guy whose most famous speech is about white people writing a document that's hypocritical toward other races. His whole thing that he's famous for is critiquing people by having a white lens.
Amazing.
Maybe we'll start doing these little behind-the-scenes historical discussions about how and why we create our PragerU Kids videos. Because, Richard, I will say this to you and to everyone watching and listening, PragerU Kids content could not happen without you. So I applaud you. I thank you. You have educated me so very much in the last few years, personally in our office as we have these discussions, as we're creating the shows, as we go through scripts. He'll go through my scripts and say, green light good, yellow light stop, red light, Jill, that did not happen. I am revising this for you. And that's how we keep everything kosher.
I wonder what a red light is. I would love to know a time where Jill said something that was inaccurate and was corrected.
What's a red light at PragerU, Yeah.
Oh, God.
I
couldn't imagine.
It's positive framing of the New Deal.
Yeah. It's like FDR was actually elected 4 times. They're like, red light. He wasn't actually elected. What were the other
Be done with it.
We're at hour 48 minutes. What was this? Necessary violence in Frederick Douglass's narrative.
Yeah, that if we wanted to talk about well, Douglass as a reformer, right? As a gradualist, as that kind of person, this is an actual academic analysis of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass about his discussions of the use of righteous violence.
If you need more proof that Frederick Douglass was not the person that PragerU is claiming that they are, you should go Google this and you'll be able to find it.
All right, I'll read one sentence from it that I found was perfect. It's kind of from the conclusion. In a perfect world, problems would be solved through non-violence. But Douglass's narrative presents the belief that in a world where people can brutally abuse their fellow men and women, and an evil such as slavery can exist, using violence to overcome that evil is both justified and necessary.
Nick, what you're forgetting is these people are academics in academia. So they're automatically Marxists and should be ignored.
I mean, those academics probably don't even have a bachelor's degree in history.
They probably don't.
Yeah.
Again, if you're trying to pit Frederick Douglass against defund the police activists, Black Lives Matter, 2020, again, and even in that context, these were very small, like the violent riots were very small and isolated, right, incidents in the grand scheme of millions of people participating in the BLM movement across the world. But of course, those are the narratives that particularly one side that Prager supports. So having to balance it out with, right, Frederick Douglass, a black voice, a former slave on the other side to say like, no, hold the boat in this violent stuff and this radical change stuff, guys. Again, takes it out of his own context as an escaped slave who used the threat of violence, to eventually leave slavery himself, right? He had to use the violence of the system against it in order to seek his own freedom.
Well, let's send them off. What's the end of the video?
It requires patience and compromise. Then you might want to join their cause. But if they are radicals like Garrison, you and your brother will be best served to stay away.
I think I'm just gonna worry about surviving middle school for now.
That sounds wonderful. And you, Leo?
I'm just gonna worry about being a kid.
You went back in time to talk to Frederick Douglass. You should care about more than just that. You have access to a time machine. Jeez.
Also, no plot conclusion. They went back in time and stood in front of a building and talked to Frederick Douglass for 7 minutes. That's their adventure?
And they said, well, I'm just going to worry about being a kid.
Well, no. See, Layla thought that math teachers talking about racism was weird. And now she knows that it's bad and evil.
And weird. Bad and evil.
Weird.
Yeah. And she knows that in the end, it was okay that slavery existed for as long as it did because it was a compromise, and compromise is good because Frederick Douglass believed that it was necessary. Slavery was necessary in the United States, as is evidenced by all of his great writings and speeches. So we learned a lot today. Thanks, Media Matters.
I'm exhausted. This was too much.
We need the readout for the recording.
No, listen. So I've been watching a lot of, this doesn't need to go in the recording. This doesn't matter. We'll talk about it later. Thank you all so much for watching. Are you laughing at me?
Are you talking to the viewer or are you talking to me?
I'm talking to you, yeah.
Thanks for liking and subscribing. Are you laughing at me?
Thank you all so very much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment. You know all the YouTube things. How about for this video, you comment what things you would like to have included on a PragerU bingo card. Thank you all so very much, and we will see you, or they will see you. I might not be here. This has gone on too long. You can figure out where to cut it.